Hi, my name is Joanna Berger, and I am the owner and animal behaviorist at the Animal Behavior Consultancy. I wanted to share some information today about what it is that an animal behaviorist actually does and what it means to be an animal behaviorist. A lot of veterinarians that I've been speaking to have asked for more information about what an animal behaviorist is and why there is a need for animal behaviorists. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about some other words that people tell me they think of when I start to explain what it is that I do. One would be, and I'm letting my cat help out with this video a little bit, that's Mr. Kitty. So some of the words that other people will mention when I talk about animal behavior work are animal psychologist, dog or animal trainer, animal whisperer, and then there's animal communicator and animal psychic. I'm going to start with animal communicator. That's something that people are labeling themselves as and selling their, I've heard recently there are people going around saying that they are animal communicators. I have a master's degree in animal behavior science, and I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, which is the study of human behavior, as well as animal behavior. And I have worked as a veterinary assistant for 5 years and have studied animal communication. So my thesis during my master's degree in animal behavior did look at animal communication. So you could call me an animal communicator. I study animal communication by observing the body language of animals, and that is the way that other species communicate. And even there are psychology studies that have shown that humans communicate a lot with nonverbal body language. You know, facial expressions are really important so that you understand what someone is communicating. So body language is really important to both humans in their communication and other species. Other species like birds, dogs, cats don't use language the way that we do. So to understand what animals are trying to communicate, we need to be really good at watching their body language and knowing their body language. And each species has its own language. And so cats and dogs have specific postures, and they'll move their bodies in a certain way to show that they are fearful or aggressive, or stressed or in pain or happy. One really clear example is most people know that a dog that's wagging his tail is usually happy. Tail wags are a really nice body movement that shows happiness. But you have to be careful because there's another type of tail wag that's a little bit lower that can be a sign of stress or fear. So an animal behaviorist who has a lot of experience watching the very specific details of these little behaviors or these body postures, these body language of dogs could tell you the difference between the happy wagging tail and the fearful, nervous tail wag. So I've studied dog body language. I've spent a lot of time handling thousands of dogs in different situations, and I'm very skilled in reading the fine details of dog body language so that I can tell what a dog is trying to communicate. I have also studied cat body language, and my thesis research was on parrot body language. So I created what we call an ethogram in behavior science, which is just I spent many hours carefully observing the fine details of parrot behavior and how parrots interacted with each other. And then I created a list of the body postures that I was seeing. For example, a parrot lifting one leg is a very clear body posture. And when that leg is lifted, I wrote a little description in my thesis paper about how, when that leg is lifted, that's a body posture that is aggressive, or a sign of territoriality. My study focused on the territorial social behaviors of African gray parrots. So, yes, I could call myself an animal communicator. The best terminology and the most accepted terminology is animal behaviorist. And it's a little bit more clear to say I'm an animal behaviorist than an animal communicator, because the way that animals communicate is through their behavior. Another term that I've heard people say is animal psychic, because they think that it's, magic, that we can know the thoughts and read the minds of animals. But again, that comes down to communication and knowing about the natural behavior of the species, what is normal for them, what environment is best for them. And there are certain things that typically do stress cats. For example, if a cat, has a really dirty litter box, that might cause stress to them. And you can predict, I've been to a lot of lectures about cat behavior. I listen to lots of talks. I've taken lots of courses, not just my master's degree. I completed 2 other courses with leaders in animal behavior science, and listened to a lecture by Scott Eccles about environmental enrichment. So there's also the environmental component that comes into understanding why an animal is behaving a certain way. And since I have studied that, I can usually predict what is causing your pet to behave in a strange way, if I know the environment that your pet is in, and I look at your relationship with your pet, and I have a knowledge of normal behavior for a cat and cat body language, so I can use all of that knowledge to discuss with you why your cat is behaving in a strange way. And it may seem to you like I'm doing magic. I've been told, the fact that I know how to train cats and I can teach cats to do tricks. I could teach a cat to sit or jump through a hoop or, wave their little paw. I could teach any number of tricks to a cat. And I've been told, oh, that's black magic. How can you train a cat? That must be magic. And it's kind of flattering, I feel like, yeah, that's cool that you think that I have magical powers. But actually, I'm using the principles of learning theory and behaviorism, which I learned in my psychology classes and then studied in more detail in my master's degree, and through clicker training classes with the Karen Pryor Academy. And the same principles apply to all species. It's interesting that all species learn in a similar way. So learning theory was defined by B.F. Skinner and he used animal behavior studies to talk about human behavior. But we can also use his work to train animals, and he was talking to a lot of animal trainers at the time. So another word is animal trainer. The difference between an animal behaviorist and an animal trainer is that an animal trainer, dog trainer, will teach your dog tricks or specific behaviors. I could teach your dog to sit. I could teach your dog to lie down. I can teach your dog to heel, walk right next to you on a leash. I I can teach your dog to stay while lying down. And then I could teach your dog to shake hands, or I could teach a bunch of different tricks. And that is great. It's good to have dogs who can sit and lie down and walk with you nicely on a leash and come when they're called. Like, these are all really important skills for a dog to have. And that's what a dog trainer focuses on, is teaching those skills. And it's kind of like a school teacher teaches a child certain skills, or maybe a social worker teaches some client certain life skills that are useful, because it's useful for a dog to know how to sit, so that your dog can be successful in society. And that is part of what I do. But as an animal behaviorist, my focus is the more challenging cases of dogs that have neurotic behaviors or are not quite normal in the way that their brains are working. Dogs that are reactive and just really quick to lunge at people without any warning. Dogs that are aggressive. Dogs that have health problems because they have behavioral problems. A lot of the time that's like a lick granulonoma, where they lick it's sort of OCD behavior. Like, a person who has OCD may do repetitive behaviors. A lot of times animals will do repetitive behaviors, and one of those is licking their leg repeatedly. That can be a symptom of a mental health issue for your dog. So I'm kind of like an animal psychologist. What I do as an animal behaviorist is parallel to what clinical psychologists or psychotherapists do. So, and as an animal behaviorist, it's most similar to a family psychologist who looks at the behavioral patterns within a system that is the family. So I would go into your home and I would work with you and watch how you behave and how your pet behaves and how you interact and what the environment is in the home. And it is a systems approach to behavior. It's fairly complex. And then I could analyze that. I've been trained in behavior analysis, and I can come up with a plan for how to change certain things in the relationship with your pet, certain things in the environment, and certain things with your behavior and your pet's behavior that can be modified so that your pet does not have the is not suffering, is not stressed, and then that addresses the mental health issue that your pet has. And I can work with veterinarians, and they can prescribe medication that works in the brain, psychiatric medication. So a veterinary behaviorist who's a veterinarian trained in animal behavior and who knows a great deal about psychoactive medications for animals is very much parallel to a human psychiatrist. Whereas since I don't have a veterinary license, I'm not a practicing doctor of veterinary medicine, I would not be allowed to prescribe the medication, just like a clinical psychologist who has a PhD in psychology and is doing therapy is not allowed to legally prescribe medication for their patient. So if a clinical psychologist has a patient in therapy who has anxiety, and they diagnose the patient with anxiety, they can work on different behavioral techniques to decrease anxiety. And they could also refer their patient to a psychiatrist who could prescribe an anti-anxiety medication. And sometimes it is necessary to do both. Sometimes it's considered best practice to be on to use the medication with behavioral therapy, so that you don't need to be relying on the medication forever. And it's shown that that's the best way to address a mental health or behavioral concern, is a combination of behavioral modification, and like for humans it's therapy, for animals it's animal behavior consulting, and then you're able to fully address the problem. And usually just medicating or does not fully address the problem. So I can provide the behavioral side of it. So I've gone through quite a few of the terms that people mention. The other big one is animal whisperer. I'm okay with again, that kind of touches on animal communicator. And again, I do understand animal communication. It is what I study. But animal whisperer doesn't explain that I am looking at the very subtle details of the facial expressions or the ear movements or the body postures, the tail, wag rate, or there are many, many, many very fine details of animal behaviors that I'm looking at, and that is how the animal communicates. And I do know how to read that, so I do understand animal body language and communication, but animal whisperer is a little bit vague. I prefer talking about how I listen to animals and watch animals, really. Because so much of their communication is visible through body language. And I do listen. I mean, I also am listening to animals if a dog is whining, if I can hear a dog panting really loudly, if a dog is barking, those give me information as well. But so I use that in addition to, watching the postures of the dog. And so dogs do communicate with sound and whining. There's different, pitches of how they are whining. And that is another piece of the puzzle to understanding what they are trying to communicate. But mainly it's looking at their behavior. I can whisper to animals. It is possible, since I have worked with my dog and trained him to do a lot of tricks, I can, I don't have to yell his cue words or commands. I can say, sit, really, really quietly, or I could even just hold up my hand, and that's a cue for him. I don't even have to say a word, because he can see that my hand is raised, and that means, for him, I've taught him that means sit. I can also just whisper, sit. And he can hear me, because animals do, dogs have great hearing. Their hearing is much better than ours. So I can whisper to animals. And it is kind of fun to watch a really good animal trainer who does just tell the commands really, really quietly, or does really, really subtle movements themselves, which are cues to dogs. I love watching, experienced dog trainers working with their dogs that they work with all the time, and it is just a tiny little movement of the dog trainer's foot that tells the dog, okay, now it's time to lie down. It's also fun. You can also whistle to dogs. That's how a lot of old-fashioned shepherds would train their dogs. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can give cues, and so whispering is a way to give commands to a dog. And it looks really cool and impressive, but it does, calling myself an animal whisperer does not capture exactly what I'm doing. And it doesn't tell you about my educational background, because I have spent a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of effort learning as much as I possibly can from the leaders in the world who have also dedicated their lives to learning everything they can about animal behavior. There are some celebrity animal trainers or TV personalities who people mention. I use similar dog training techniques to Victoria Stilwell, who you might know from It's Me or the Dog. She doesn't have my educational background or my veterinary work experience, but she is she's a good dog trainer, and she uses positive techniques that are similar to. She trains in a similar style to me, so that might give you a clue about my techniques if you've watched her show. Also, there's a little bit of difficulty with animal TV shows because they are edited and you're not seeing all that goes into the training and behavior process. But it is a good, introduction for some people. Another person that I'm also compared to is Jackson Galaxy. He is on the show My Cat from Hell, and he works with cats. And a lot of what he does, I would also do. Again, he doesn't have my educational background, and he's a TV personality, but he does some useful techniques that I do use with cats. And we're both people who work with cats and try to improve things for them. And there's also like Dr. Dolittle, who talks to the animals. He's, a fictional character. I was very much inspired by Dr. Dolittle. When I was young, I just loved the story of Dr. Dolittle, and I wanted to talk to the animals like Dr. Dolittle did. And so that kind of set me into this path of my career, which has been trying to figure out how to talk to animals and how to understand what they're trying to communicate. Dr. Dolittle, in that story, the communication is in words and in language. And in reality, more of what is important to understanding animal communication is their body language and behavior. And it's something that we underestimate because we are human and we use language so much. Body language and facial expressions are extremely important for human communication as well. So it's good to pay attention to all of those things. And then you might ask, well, why do you need to be educated? Like, why can't I just know these things myself? Like, how are you so good at knowing what animals are thinking or feeling? Like, I don't understand why I'm not seeing what you're seeing. But it is because I've spent many, many, many hours carefully observing the fine details of animal behavior. I also have the psychology training. I understand behavioral systems and different ways of making it clear, like clarifying for a pet owner what is going on with their pet. And I do that in a methodical way, because if I were speaking in a very vague, abstract way, like, oh, I just feel like your animal is like not so happy, or like there's a lot of, I've studied how to describe animal behavior in specific terms that are hopefully clear to, pet owners, to the public, to everybody. There is a little bit of a problem with the science, with the fact that I have spent so much time in science that some of the words that I use sound a little bit long and awkward, or they're words that people aren't used to hearing. And I think that's the big disconnect right now, why the reason why a lot of people are saying, like, well, what is an animal behaviorist? What do you do? I don't know what an animal behaviorist is. It is a very new field of work and of scientific research. It is cutting edge. We only are just starting to understand, how to communicate with animals and how to understand what they're communicating. And at the same time, people have always worked with animals. And I know a farrier who is elderly, and he has been a farrier for his whole life, and he's been working closely with horses since the beginning, decades and decades before anybody was talking about animal behavior science or behaviorism at all. Even, the study of behavior is pretty new. But he happens to pay close attention to the horses that he works with, and he really loves horses, and he has figured out how to understand horses really, really well. And I can learn a lot from people like him. There are other farriers who don't know anything about horse behavior, and that can be a real problem. And he will, talk to me about his concerns about those people. And for me personally, I feel that this is my career path because as a young child, I was always into really listening and paying close attention to animals. I was very quiet and just kind of I loved animals. I spent a lot of time around many different types of animals, and I read everything I could about animal facts as well. And, but just sitting with animals and paying very close attention to them in a very calm and very quiet way as a really young child, helped me see that I could befriend almost any animal really quickly. And my mother was always scared that I would be bitten, because I was always like going up to strange dogs and making friends with random dogs. And my poor mom was like, you should need to stop making friends with random dogs. That's not safe for a little child. And it's not safe for a little child. But I never was bitten. And it was because it's just my way of being that I am very much in tune with animals. And even as a young child, I noticed that other people were not. Even, grown-ups were not as in tune with animals, not like connecting with them in the way that I was connecting with them. And I could see how my mom was like, oh no, that big dog might bite you. And I was like, no, I was little, but I was like, this dog is happy and is calm, and, and I'm calm, and the dog is calm. And if the dog stops being calm, I'll know that, and I'll go away from the dog, and give him some space. But that was sort of just an understanding that I had, but I didn't have a way of telling people how I knew that the dog was calm. And now that I have studied animal behavior for a long time, I am better at being able to describe to people like my mom who, are like, I don't understand. How are you petting that dog? How do you know that it's safe to pet that dog? Well, I can say, I know it's safe to pet that dog because look at his facial expression, look at his tail posture, look at his heart rate. And you can even, like heart rate, breathing rate. There's many little signs that a dog is calm, and there's many signs when a dog is stressed, and I can describe those to people. For one example is piloerection, and that's what we call it in science. It's one of those long scientific words that just means that their hair is standing up on end. So if a dog's hair, especially on the back of his neck and upper back, is standing up straight, that's a it's a very important sign that the dog is not comfortable and is not calm and is getting stressed. There's many other signs, and there are some breeds of dogs, like the Rhodesian Ridgeback, that has fur that sticks up straight on its back all the time. So it's none of these specific behaviors by themselves tell you everything that you need to know about how a dog is feeling, but I understand the context and the environment, and I can also watch human behavior and the interaction patterns between dogs and people, and I take all of those factors into account, when assessing animal behavior, and then I translate that to the owner. And I so it is kind of translation. Temple Grandin has a good book called Animals in Translation, and that is kind of what a behaviorist does, is take, I use my knowledge of animal behavior to translate what an animal is trying to say, and I put "say" in quotation marks because, again, it's mostly body language, not words. But I translate what an animal is trying to say to the owner. And I can teach methods of training that are ethical and effective, and have used that to help the owner communicate back with their pet. And I can also talk to you about things you can change in the environment, and studies of the behavior of wild animals and animals that are kept as pets. And I use a lot, and I also am trained in how to do that research, so I can use my training in scientific research to further study animal behavior and communication, so that we can have a better understanding of our animals. So that was a bit long. Thank you for watching. I'm working on a shorter explanation that's more concise, but thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned a little bit. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and thank you again. Have a great day. Bye.